time to talk about Bitmain. So Bitmain is the largest Bitcoin mining manufacturer, and they're sending 56,000 machines to the USA of Georgia under a new deal. That's $62 million for a 200 megawatt facility in that state. Of course, this comes after months and months and months of trial and error of trying to get machines over to different parts of the world. Currently, Bitmain and a lot of other Chinese miners have just stockpiled these machines in China, and they've just been sitting on racks waiting to be deployed around the world. There's been a few locations that have seen machines being deployed to. It's like Kazakhstan or Texas or Quebec. But for the most part, a lot of the machines that were pulled off the racks in China in May and June have just kind of sat in warehouses. Some Chinese miners have been able to plug back in if they're kind of a smaller scale or medium scale. David Pan had a great article about that a few weeks ago on CoinDesk. Be sure to check that out. But for the most part, these industrial sized miners who have just huge farms, just tons of megawatts of power, they've had to just kind of sit and wait and see what come up to play. So now that Bitmain has this new facility, I think there's also a few other facilities that Bitmain is looking at. One in Texas comes top of mind currently. But we're going to see more of these miners coming to the U.S., which of course is bringing a whole new industry to the U.S. and brings up a ton of questions about the U.S.'s involvement in the proof of work Bitcoin mining, which of course is like this huge bag, like ESG questions, environmental stuff is all tied up in that. Zach, I'm going to throw this story to you. When you see this big headline, 56,000 machines in Georgia, what's your thought?
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, comes fresh on the heels of a Blockstream announcement with a major Australian asset manager. They're gonna test out a green energy mining facility also in the U.S. So momentum around U.S. Bitcoin mining is not waning. I'll say that much. It's interesting to see that U.S. really seems to be sort of taking the pole position that that China gave away when it really cracked down on the industry a few months ago. So, whether it's Georgia, whether it's upstate New York, whether it's Texas, whether it's the Pacific Northwest, there's a ton of activity going on in Bitcoin mining in the U.S. And I think this just adds to that story. And I think the thing that you mentioned about sort of ESG and whether or not U.S. businesses can do this in a responsible manner is going to be a really interesting question, right? A lot of these firms are publicly traded. A lot of these firms have major and powerful shareholders. So whether they can sort of thread the needle of keeping the Bitcoin network going strong while also alleviating some of the environmental concerns, I think that'll be the interesting question should the U.S. continue to increase its share of Bitcoin hash rate. So I'll toss that to Jen.
I just have a question for you, Will. Is there any concern on the regulatory front? I know we saw a regulatory crackdown in China. We saw a small mention of miners in the infrastructure bill with all these machines coming to the States. Like, is this a concern that is on the radar?
I think you have to kind of think about how the U.S. government works and how it's kind of broken across different tiers. So like the local, the state, and then the federal level. And there's checks and balances between all of those. So yes, there could be some issues depending on like where you're at. So for example, in 2017 bull market, the local communities in Seattle and that area were not super happy to see all these Bitcoin miners plug in because they were driving up electricity rates. And so they passed some rules and regulations in those local areas and increase the cost for those Bitcoin miners to operate. And those Bitcoin miners left. On a larger federal scale, it's looking right now from just basically the conversation on the Senate floor when that bill is passed, that Bitcoin miners will not be affected very much by the infrastructure bill, if at all. They kind of see Bitcoin miners as a neutral technology, not as brokers. The IRS doesn't see them as brokers, and the Treasury does not see them as brokers. And then on the state level, it's really just depends on where you're at. New York State has very hostile cryptocurrency regulation across the board, not just for Bitcoin mining, but also just for like anything with their really infamous New York Act there. But other states are competing for Bitcoin miners and for other cryptocurrency industries in general. Kentucky passed some legislation to give like tax breaks. Texas has been very aggressive in courting Bitcoin miners, with Greg Abbott even speaking at a Bitmain conference a few months ago, asking Chinese miners to come to the state. So I think like the answer is it depends on where you are and who you're dealing with. But for the most part, the U.S. remains like very welcoming to any sort of cryptocurrency industry that provides jobs for the most part. I think the contention is where you get to moving money around on like exchanges and the things you're seeing with the SEC right now.